In the early hours of October 16, 2021, a mother unzipped her family's tent on a remote stretch of coastline in Western Australia and instantly felt something was wrong. The zipper, which had been secured from the inside the night before, was partially open. Her 4-year-old daughter was gone. So was the child's bright red sleeping bag. There were no screams during the night, no obvious signs of struggle, just the quiet sound of wind moving across the scrublands near Blowhole's campground outside the town of Carnarvon. Hours earlier, everything had felt ordinary. The Indian Ocean stretched endlessly beyond the cliffs, waves surged through narrow rock formations. Families had settled into tents beneath clear skies. It was the kind of place people visited to escape the modern world, remote, peaceful, isolated. That isolation would soon become the most disturbing detail of all. Cleo Smith had gone to sleep beside her younger sister. Her mother and stepfather were only feet away. The tent had been zipped closed, the campsite accessible primarily by a single rough road leading back toward Carnarvon. Yet sometime during the night, someone approached. At around 6 a.m., when Cleo's mother realized her daughter was missing, the silence of the campground felt heavier than usual. At first, there was the brief hope that perhaps the child had wandered outside, but the campsite remained still. No small footprints nearby, no sound, no movement. The realization settled in quickly. This was not a child who had simply stepped away. Emergency services were contacted immediately. Officers from the Western Australia Police Force arrived within hours. What began as a missing child report escalated rapidly into a large-scale search operation. Investigators examined the tent carefully. The zipper appeared to have been opened from the outside. That detail changed everything. Nearby, faint tire impressions were visible on the sandy access road. While the campground saw occasional visitors, the timing of those tracks raised questions. Search teams moved outward in widening circles. Volunteers combed dunes and scrubland. Marine units scanned the shoreline. Helicopters traced slow arcs across the coastline. Every possibility had to be considered. As news spread across Australia, the case drew national attention. A young child had disappeared from inside a tent while her family slept only feet away. The vulnerability of that detail struck deeply. Road checkpoints were established around Carnarvon. Detectives began reviewing surveillance footage from fuel stations, stores, and traffic points. Officers conducted door-to-door inquiries. Thousands of pieces of information were submitted by the public. Days passed. No confirmed sightings. No trace in the surrounding wilderness. The absence of evidence gradually suggested something investigators feared from the beginning, that this was not an accident, but a deliberate act. Behind the scenes, analysts began reviewing digital movement data. Even in remote regions, vehicles leave trails, captured briefly by cameras, logged by routine systems, noticed only when examined carefully. Among hundreds of vehicles identified in Carnarvon during the critical hours, one drew increasing attention. Its movements during the early morning window did not align with typical travel patterns. Detectives began quietly examining its registered owner. The vehicle belonged to a man named Terrence Darrell Kelly. At first glance, nothing immediately linked him publicly to the case. He was a local resident. He had not drawn significant prior attention in connection to violent crime. But as investigators compared vehicle data, witness accounts, and timestamps, the pattern tightened. Small inconsistencies began aligning. Surveillance operations were established discreetly. Investigators now faced a fragile possibility that Cleo might still be alive. More than 2 weeks after the disappearance, in the early hours of November 3rd, officers executed a planned operation at a residence in Carnarvon. The search was conducted methodically, room by room. Behind a closed interior door, officers made a discovery that few had dared to hope for. Cleo Smith was alive. The recovery marked an extraordinary turning point. After 18 days of uncertainty, the missing child was located inside the residence. She was carried safely from the property as Terrence Darrell Kelly was taken into custody. For investigators, it was confirmation that weeks of meticulous analysis, tire impressions, surveillance fragments, digital traces, community information had converged accurately. But the investigation was not complete. Detectives reconstructed the events in detail. Evidence indicated that Kelly had driven to Blowhole's campground in the early morning darkness, approached the tent, and opened the zipper before removing the child in her sleeping bag. He then returned to Carnarvon, where Cleo remained inside the residence until her recovery. Forensic analysis of items recovered from the property, combined with digital movement data and witness information, established a comprehensive timeline. Kelly was formally charged with offenses related to the abduction. As the case progressed through the Western Australian legal system, prosecutors presented the evidence methodically. The vehicle data, forensic findings, and circumstances of the recovery formed the core of the case. In 2023, Terrence Darrell Kelly entered a guilty plea to abducting the child. He was sentenced to a substantial term of imprisonment. The legal outcome brought formal closure. For many across Australia, the case stood out not only because the suspect was identified and prosecuted, but because the search ended with a child found alive, an outcome far less common in similar investigations. The case also illustrated the interplay between traditional field searches and modern investigative tools. No single clue solved it. Instead, incremental details, a zipper position, faint tire tracks, surveillance timestamps, gradually narrowed the possibilities until only one path remained. In Carnarvon, the coastline remains unchanged. Waves still surge through the blowholes. The wind continues across the red earth. Families still camp beneath the open sky. But the events of October 2021 remain deeply remembered. The disappearance began in silence, inside a zipped tent on a quiet coastal night. It ended with the sound of a child being carried safely back into daylight, and a reminder that even in isolation, careful investigation and collective determination can uncover the truth.